Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second workshop from series number 2. Bienvenue à notre deuxième atelier de la deuxième série d'ateliers. We are going to get started. We have Inga today who will be sharing us some first look into machine readable content. So I will let you take it away.
That's awesome. Does anybody know what machine readable content actually means from a website standpoint? How is that different from what Google has been doing since 1998?
From
Anybody
your
know?
past class, it was the distinction between whether something is a number, meaning a date, meaning a distance, meaning a measurement, meaning whatever. So our capacity,
And address, yeah.
And or what a set of letters reference.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, the issue is that most of us relate to the web based on what we see. So I go to a web page, I see a bunch of images, I see a bunch of text. That is the website. Behind that, there is the code view of the website. And in that code view, all kinds of things can exist that we actually never see, but that are fundamentally changing the function of the site. So one of those pieces is what is called machine readable data. So all that's meant by data is the information you put online. All of that is data. An image is data, a piece of text is data, a price is data. So when we talk about machine readable data, we're actually not just talking about can the machine read that data, right? Because sure, I can make sense of, with a thesaurus and a dictionary, I can train Google to understand the beginning and endings of words, and I can sort of train it to do that. What we mean by machine readable is that the machine, the search engine, actually understands what that piece of data is. And if it understands it, it can relate it to other pieces of data that it already has in its very large, very massive database. So as you know, Google essentially runs a database that it queries. Whenever I put a search into Google, it queries its own database and returns a result. It does that incredibly quickly, as you know. It still tells us how many microseconds it took to return a search result. So part of what happens is there's this massive, array of physical infrastructure where all of this information is housed proprietarily at Google. And it allows them to do really neat things like return search results really fast. So what happens on the back end of our websites has become incredibly important. So this is where we sometimes refer to this as advanced search engine optimization. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as technical search engine optimization, as opposed to just, I have keywords with which I write my text, and I make sure that those keywords appear in a few places. That's kind of what we covered previously a little bit more of, right? So that's the basic gist of what this machine readable data is about. Now, as you might imagine, so we're still not dealing here with artificial intelligence being intelligent. It's not that. It's just big data, right? Google has capacity to compute massive amounts of data, almost synchronously, and it returns a useful result in an incredible speed. It's just big data. AI is a completely different topic and not one that we really have any reason to touch on within this conversation. When a search engine understands information, the next qualitative leap is that it can provide you answers to your questions, right? As opposed to just a bunch of search links. And an answer to a question is qualitatively different from search links. An answer is singular. Right? So the question of what's on tonight is something that a user might be really interested in, and it might be because they're interested in an at-home event, kind of reality right now, or they might be interested in figuring out where to get takeout from a restaurant. Those are really natural questions that a user might ask, and being able to show up as the answer to that requires us to use a thing called structured data or structured metadata markup. Or if we're thinking about search engines, you will also see schema.org markup Those all mean the same thing. Okay. There isn't really any more voodoo to that. So far, so good. So most of our time, I want to spend with actually showing you how to do that for different kinds of websites. And so the place that I thought, I'll start, I'm going to share this with you for a moment. So conceptually, let me just put that into a nicer view. Slideshow from current slide. There we go. So the most immediate example for anyone who's in the performing arts or in the events business is the question of how do you get your events to show up as this Google Events answer, right? So there's 3 ways to do that. And depending on what kind of website you have and what it's built on, some are more readily available than others. So the 3 ways you have to do that is you might be using a third-party site where all of your events are posted, and they might be optimized already using structured data. So that if you already use one of those, that might be convenient to simply say, great, they'll do it. I don't have to make any changes to the coding on my site. I don't have to invest in that. It depends a little bit on, how many events you might have in the course of a year, what makes more sense. If you've got, an event every week, it's worth it to make sure that your own site handles all of that. If you got an event, 6 times a year, is that worth the effort, right? Depends on your website framework a little bit. The second way that you can get this information up is that the content management system, the CMS that runs the content of your website. So Wix, Foursquare, Squarespace, WordPress, they're all content management systems. They may have plugins, they may have aids that help you do that. And then the third way is you may need to edit the HTML on your page. So for both the Wix framework, Eileen, that you're using, and the WordPress framework that many other people are using, on Wix, you don't exactly have a plugin, but you have a place that Wix has made available to put your structured data markup code. So the question becomes a little bit different depending on which site you're using, right? In both cases, you still use it. In both cases, the answer for you is number 2 is what you're doing. But you have different steps to take to achieve it, basically. So those are the 3 ways in which you can make sure that your events would show up in the Google answer around events. What's on this month, what's on in Stratford, what's on in Toronto, what's on in the Yukon, right? This is pretty straightforward, I imagine. So far, so good, right? An example of a third party that integrates with Google Events that you may or may not use, but an example is Eventbrite. Eventbrite is a very common ticketing thing. It works really well if you don't sell seats, but just a general admission, basically. It doesn't really handle seats. It's not a ticketing, thing like Ticketmaster or a theater manager or Audience View, where you can actually sell seats in a hall. They started using structured data back in 2015, and they participated in Google's search experience for events on mobile that launched in 2017. Now, why did I put those dates up for you? Just to let you know, this is actually, like, we're in 2022 now. This stuff is like 4, 5, 6 years old. So Eventbrite was one of the first to go there with Google, okay? Now, you may realize that movie theaters were much sooner. Right, you've been able to get that information about what's on at the theater, meaning the cinema, for a while longer. Similarly, the restaurant interfaces have been, and hotel interfaces are a little bit older. Now, Facebook events also often shows up in your event listings results on Google. Doesn't always seem to show up, so there might be something about individual settings, whether something is public or private, whether it's searchable or not, that makes a difference. But I see lots of Facebook events getting picked up there. So those are two basically major avenues you might have today without changing anything on your website by simply using those tools. And then the thing you would watch for is that you got to put all your information there, not just some of it. You might want to have links, like on your website, you might have videos that you want to link to and show me like what that show is about. Or you might have interviews that you want to link to sort of, or teasers or highlight reels or something like that. That's a little bit harder in those frameworks, but not impossible, right? You would end up doing most of that by simply linking without being able to embed the video, for instance. That's the whole difference. Now, there's a bunch of places that don't use structured data for their events. So interestingly, Ticketmaster hasn't adopted this. So when you see a lot of results and you clicked on the second thing around the events piece, you'll often see kind of obscure ticketing engines. Those are often not the ones that are used by the venue. Those are often ones that scrape content from the internet. And so you want to be careful there, because if you don't do anything in that structured data thing, anybody can come scrape content from any website. It's what Google does, it's what search engines do, and it's what a bunch of aggregators of various sorts do, right? So I tend to favor a frame where you're in charge of your own content and you get to display it the way you want to. So it's useful to think about this if your capacity doesn't quite match with changing how your site is built. Because depending on how it's built, it can be a little bit harder, a little bit more effortful. That you might want to look at some of those tools that actually use it. All right, let's see what my next page is. So I want to show you a couple. I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to go to my actual, I'm going to share some things on the actual online part of the world. So let me just go to Google, what's on near me, and hopefully they show up again. I'm just going to share my actual browser here with you, and I want to just show you a bunch of stuff. So you've seen me show this to you before. I just did a Google search for what's on near me. That kind of search, plain language search, gets me the Google Events engine to show up. And those are basically at the top of the page, you get these results, right? And when I was looking at, let's say, Folklords on Saturday, that's today, part of Pivot Festival, that's a local theater company, you see a bunch of information here. Is this large enough for you to actually read? Okay, so you see a bunch of information here. There's an image, there's a map. Here, this information actually says read more on Nakai Theater, so you know it's coming off their website. You see the information and tickets goes to Nakai Theater. This is great. This is what you want, right? You can click on more info there. They're doing a lot of not ticketed things. If there was a ticket link, it would say tickets right here. Then it shows you the venue. Nakai doesn't have a venue, they rent stuff. So Old Fire Hall, fantastic. All the information I need to, about this event is in this view, right? If I click on more info, I go to the actual page. And you get this information sort of about the event here. That's pretty nice, right? When I was looking at the site and I was trying to figure out, so how does Jacob, the guy who runs the Nakai and does this work, how does he get the structured data there? Because I know he's not using WordPress. I was pretty sure he uses, I think it's Squarespace. And so I took a look at his code in the back end. And, I realized that it looked like he might be hard coding some of this, right? He's a pretty smart techie. He knows how to do this kind of stuff. The benefit of that is really obvious, right? Because he shows up in this view of what's on. And if you don't show up in this view, especially in a larger place, I mean, Whitehorse is pretty small, right? Not unlike Stratford, perhaps. Our catchment doesn't go to Toronto, though. We don't have a catchment, right? In Southern Ontario, you get a lot of competing things within an hour's drive, right? So it's really important that you show up in these kind of searches in this view, because hundreds of other things will simply take precedent over your stuff. That's a real concern, right? one of the things I wanted to show you is, let me know if you can see this when it pops up. You see the Schema Builder pop up there? So I installed a extension, what they call an extension for Chrome. And I can be on any page on the web, and I can click on that little icon once I install that an extension. And you know, this takes like seconds, right? It's super easy. And it actually shows me what kind of schema or structured data, same thing, synonyms, let's just say, was discovered. And it will show me the markup for these various things. And one of the things it does that's really neat is that it will show you what's missing or what's not perfectly done. So in this case, there's a location required. Great, the name is here, but the address is not, right? So what happens here is that the Schema Builder isn't looking at the content of the website that we're seeing, that we're looking at. It's looking at the code in the backend, the scripts in the backend, right? And it simply says, hey, here's what the stuff is, and they can recognize that. Now, this is, at the end of the day, this is what, you know, Google is looking for. If it finds that markup, then it can make sense of that. Pretty straightforward. Okay. And it's okay that there's a few things missing and there's a few recommendations. You get a pretty quick diagnostic view using a tool like this. This tool, I was going to talk about that a bit later, but we're here now. So I'll say this tool also is, all of these tools are evolving quickly. Okay, so think about 2015, 2017. It's not that long ago, right? To build like products and suites of ways to make, suites of, you know, technology that make it easier to do this stuff. So there's a lot of development all the time. Okay, so these tools are getting better. When I first started using the schema thing, deployment wasn't part of this, but I could use it as a tester. You can now start using it as a builder. So you see, I just clicked on the address thing here. And if I wanted to add this information, I could. I can actually add a postal code. I can actually add the street address, right? So it actually functions as a builder as well. And then when you view the markup, you see this is the gobbledygook I just entered. This seems pretty quick, doesn't it? Like, not so bad. And then you see there's some functionality here that says test on Google. So it uses the schema testing tool to say, hey, is that stuff actually correct? Test code. Like this is 2 clicks later, right? And it'll test it, it'll take a moment, and it'll give me an assessment of how well I'm doing here. And then I can start to explore that, and I can, you know, look at what are the warnings. Do I care? Do I have these? Great, I now know where to fix. So there's always 2 parts to this, right? Because it's not as easy as the words I see on the screen. When you build a website, I see my headline, I see the image, I know where the image is placed relative to the body text, very intuitive stuff. This is, you know, we're dealing with code. So the idea of testing while building, it's kind of nice that these things are becoming built in. Okay, so that's just one example of a tool that you might use. You can use that on your own website. You can use it on anybody. Like I don't own Nakai's website. I'm not involved at all with that, right? But the tool is there to help me understand what they're doing, and I'm right. So very, very few clicks.
Can you actually change, like if you put in the correct information, can you actually like hit save, or does this now creates something that you copy and paste somewhere else? Or maybe you're going to talk about it later.
The way it is today is it creates something that you can copy and paste.
Okay.
That you will know is accurate, right? What they're working on right now is what they call, so this is called Schema Builder that you see here. There's a schema tester that's built in the same widget, and they're working on the schema deployment. So what they're promising is with a single line of code, you'd be able to implement all of that on your website.
Wow.
That might be more convenient, right? Go ahead.
But logistically, you're on somebody else's website right now. So at this moment,
right now I am.
Logistically speaking, though, you are not actually coding in his website. You're looking at this is what needs to be fixed. You would have to have access to his, like, it's not that invasive or.
Not at all invasive. It is not at all invasive. So just because I can do that on any single web page in the world, doesn't mean I get to deploy it on those web pages, right? So when I just said that the deployment engine that these guys are working on promises a single line of code to be able to deploy it to your website, obviously that's going to come with some security to make sure that you actually have access to the owner, the manager, the webmaster of that website, right? So I imagine it's a subscription-based service like just about anything else is. Just like when you're subscribed to Wix, you might pay them every couple of years a sum to use their engine, right? So there's a user, validation that will come with that, right? And they might not be able to deploy that for every single content management system equally, right? They might favor WordPress because most websites are built using WordPress. They might wait to do it for Wix. So what that means is that you're in the copy paste world. I can generate the code, then I copy and paste it, and I put it then in the right place on my website, right? And that right place will not look like your page. That'll be on the back end on the coding side. So far, so good. So if you look up Schema Builder, or you go to, and now the links are in the PowerPoint that is part of this workshop. You'll see a link to a thing called Schema Dev, and that's them. Those are the guys that built this thing. Now, one of the things I want to reinforce is that there is a few ways to build your structured data. The schema.org version of that is really, really important, because that is what the search engines have determined to use. Okay, so my concern with this workshop is being understood by search engines. That's why it's schema. Okay, schema is basically the lexicon of what stuff is called and what the markup is that goes with that. There are a couple of other systems, but they're not helpful to us from a search engine standpoint. They can be helpful for other reasons, in other uses, in other circumstances, and they do exist. Now, the next thing I'd like to show you is I also did a search. I know that the Yukon Arts Center does not use any structured data on their quite recently developed website. So I went to do a search for what's on, and I saw that some of their events are showing up in this view. So I'm just gonna redo the search. I'm gonna go to a different place, and I'm gonna pick up their event. I'm gonna share this with you here, because I was very curious about, so how is it that a site that has absolutely zero structured data can show up in this Google Events thing? That's a good question, right? And it's a total custom build, so it's quite challenging for them to, they can't make nimble changes like, let's just implement structured data, right? But here's the search result. So it's the same search, what's on near me. I looked at this. This is the Yukon Arts Center event. It actually goes to their page for information. It actually has, for information and tickets, it goes to their page too. And then there is What's Up Yukon. What's Up Yukon is a local community paper. They implemented structured data back in 2018, really, really well. So what I realized is, and I've been telling people up here that if you can't quite do it yourself, use them and put all of your event information into What's Up Yukon. And here's that event on What's Up Yukon, and you'll see that there's all of this same detail, the same full description. The image has been placed there typically by the Yukon Arts Center. This is something that they don't scrape content so much. It's actually a little engine where you can enter your events. And at the bottom of this, you see all of this detail around the organizer, including view organizer webpage, all of their information. So by doing this, part of what's enabled is that Google can now relate the content that they've already, scraped into their search engine from the Yukon Arts Center site, run-of-the-mill SEO, right? They can now relate that very clearly to this event on the same day, in the same venue, with the same title, right? It's completely congruent. So that might be one of the ways in which Google is getting smart, and has basically a trusted, validated way of saying this is correct information. The other option is that they may have used something called data highlighter. So again, this is a tool. The link again to this thing is in the PowerPoint, so you don't have to, sort of fret over how do I find this thing. But the tool is a Google proprietary tool. So if you use it, the only site on earth that can use it is Google. Okay. The Schema Builder thing that I just showed you, anybody in the world will be able to access that structured data that ends up living on your website if you copy and paste it over, right? This tool, only Google, it's a Google created tool that only Google uses. All right, so I want to make that distinction really clearly. It's very convenient though, because one of the things I can do on my own stuff, I'm just gonna see what happens when I click on this. I'm going to try to load this page. So this is our workshop, right? Our workshop series coming up. So what Data Highlighter does, again, this is suited if you have few events in a year, and it's just not worth the effort to try to fix your website. And you're okay with the fact that 90% of all search happens on Google. So let's feed Google, right? This is the train of thought here. What this allows you to do is you can simply highlight pieces of text. You see this? I highlight, I get a pop-up. You see the pop-up? And I can say, this is the name. And then I can say, oh, I don't know, this is going to be inaccurate, but this is the venue. And you see the markup happening on the side here, right? You see the name is there, the venue is here. And if this is the venue, if I had an address anywhere, I'd be able to do that. So I can build, okay, this is a date, so this is not going to be right, but let's assume this was the ticketing information, right? It immediately, you see how the ticket type just changed here? So I can take anything, and if it was wrong, I'll just clear the tag, right? So this information here, this is schema markup that is getting generated, and it's using it's the event version of it that I'm using because it's an event, and it generates this stuff like it's super fast, right? Highlight, literally, I get this pop-up. I'll say, oh look, that's a category. Great, I now have this piece of text is related to the markup related to a thing called category. Pretty fun, really fast, free, by the way. And if I finish this and I publish it, this information, again, same. Yeah, that's okay. That's it's trying to tell me that I'm, fudging stuff, which is fine. I am fudging stuff. But if you publish that, like you did it correctly, you're happy, right? You publish it. This gets housed in the Google database directly. It does not change anything on your website. Okay, even though you're using that page, it can be sort of a cognitive issue where you say, but I just highlighted it on my page. It's like, no, you didn't. You highlighted it in a tool that Google rendered, and then the information that you gave it is in that tool. It's called Data Highlighter. It lives nowhere else on earth, but it allows Google to use that information now about your events. It knows it's correct and accurate and trusted, and it can now use that to show your events in its Google Events engine. Make sense? So it's an alternative way to do that if you have just a few events a year. So far, so good. So Eileen, you're in that world where, Wix, Wix is your platform. Indeed, and yes. Wix doesn't have plugins for this stuff, right? So you need to find a way that's easy, palatable, doesn't, make anybody's hair get torn out to implement this stuff. So this is really why I'm showing this to you, right? Is to say there's a few tools. You can just Google them. I use a different tool any day. I don't really care, right? Because I can test whether the markup that they generate is correct. It's pretty straightforward, right? So I don't really have to sweat. I don't really have to sweat how good a tool is because I can test it right away, and it's just a click away, as you saw earlier, right? With the Schema Builder and Schema Tester, it's like a couple of clicks. It doesn't take very long, and then you're off to the races. So one of the things I wanted to show you, I'm just going to go to this 2 weeks. And they have a really great support system. They don't have plugins in the way that WordPress does, but they have a really great support system. So when I did a search for structured data markup for Wix, I came up with this really nice article, and there's a link to it in the PowerPoint as well, so you don't need to keep this here, that actually tells you how to do that and where to go to do that. So as opposed to having a plugin, what Wix has done is they basically have assigned a space on every page where you do your search engine optimization. So you're on a page, you can do your SEO, and within that there is a spot where it will say advanced SEO, and in that advanced SEO it invites you to upload your JSON LD markup. So JSON LD markup is what search engines prefer. That's just a markup language. You don't even have to understand what the hell that means. But it's as opposed to microdata, or it's as opposed to a thing called RDFA. So what we're looking for is JSON LD. And the engines I showed you generate JSON LD markup. Okay. And you simply, it tells you very specifically how to, that you can create it. And then it tells you that you should test it. And then it tells you where to add it. So here's the add SEO, right? Do all that stuff. And once you've done it the first time, or whoever amongst your colleagues takes care of that for you, once you've done it the first time, you'll realize how easy that is, right? Because you're really just generating off an event. You can't use Google Data Highlighter because it won't give you that code in quite the same nice way. You would use a JSON LD markup builder or a generator, right? Like that Schema Builder. There was a technical SEO piece that I had suggested. Let me just see if I can find that. There was a piece of homework that I had suggested to just do a piece of markup, right? And that was using, I just need to make my page smaller so I can see it. I had suggested that you use this particular engine on a thing called technicalseo.com. And the first question it has for you is, what markup are you trying to generate, right? And then when you say event, what will happen here is all of this information. Puppets 101 is the event, event description, blah, blah, blah. You see how that stuff gets automatically added to the script on the side here, right? So what happens here is you end up having to create your event in Wix, like you always have, right? And then you have an added new step. And that added new step is using a schema markup generator. You see the JSON LD in the title up at the top, right? So you know it's the right one. And then you kind of re-enter all the same stuff. So your URL is, I don't know what it is, Springworks, right, .com. All of the stuff gets generated here. And you see the little highlights. So we know what, it's really easy. You can see what you've done. As you scroll down the page, it'll have, if you scroll down the page a little bit, you'll see the other sort of really important pieces. You see the ability to add a date, a start time, 2000, an end date. Maybe it's, you're doing a 3-day marathon of some sort. Oops, there's a 0 too many. All of this gets added, right? Start date, start time, the whole shebang. Event status, look at that, moved online. How nice is that? Right, so Schema has responded back in 2020 to this really bizarre change. The other thing is your live events might have been postponed or canceled. So you see that markup is right there, super convenient. So when you're building your, Amy, when you're building your March calendar, right, and some of those events might be suited to be one or the other, these tools can now account for that. Super easy, right? If you use a WordPress site, your plugin accounts for that. Your Schema Pro or your events calendar plugin would account for that. Performer, is it a group? What is it, right? So this is pretty nice. right? So this is one, Eileen, that you can easily use because it again has integrated in it. Oops, let me just get rid of that drop down. You see this G up here and it says test. So I can go immediately and look at, you know, whether that code is correct. I can validate it, and you see the structured data. You see 0 errors, 0 warnings. Thumbs up. So you can, with confidence, copy and paste that and put it in the right spot in Wix where it says advanced SEO, right? So one of the things this means, if you follow simply where Wix wants you to put it, is it puts it in the right place on your website. The piece of information is that structured data markup has to be in the head of your website. It can't be in the body. So I mentioned it, now you know that, but you know, it basically, when you use the tool that your CMS provides you, you know it's going to be in the correct place, right? Any questions about, I know this looks deceptively easy, doesn't it? No, it doesn't.
Yes and no. If you've been playing in the back end of your wherever, you know, I do know where these things physically exist. It's just a lot of finicky work. It's not.
Exactly. So, you know, that's part of why I was showing you the help page that exists in the Wix support system. You don't have to remember it. You can just look it up if you forget, or if you need to brief somebody and say, hey, implement this on our events moving forward. You're having a whatever, an intern, a summer student, somebody, right, who doesn't know this stuff, but they're going to get really smart really fast. All you need to say is read up on it here. You have access to the site. Be aware that it doesn't show up at the top level of the page, right? Like you have to click in that little function thing on the sidebar on SEO and then advanced SEO. So it's a couple of steps down. And the other thing they have to understand is that it's done per page. So every single page gets optimized for search engines, right? And every single page would have its own advanced SEO, meaning structured data markup. So that's what they have to understand, and that's what you have to remember, right? But then, like I say, once you've done it the first time for a thing, you'll kind of go like, oh, this isn't actually, like, you're not actually writing the code, right? You're not doing that part of the work. You're just using fields in a database that you're populating. And because now in these tools, you can see the result right away. Like I see what I'm doing, right? And I see the result right away on here, right? I just canceled that event. Great. I'm going to go back to it scheduled. Attendance mode. It's online. Yeah, you see how that just appeared here? And if it's online, it's going to ask me for, you know, what. Sorry, if it's offline, it's going to ask me for the venue name below and the physical address. If it's online, it's going to ask you for the URL, the time zone, right? Really nicely done. This did not exist even a year ago, this tool, right? So like I say, this stuff is getting better all the time. So keep looking back at it. Keep looking at, you know, what's evolved. And it's getting easier all the time too, right? So that's really helpful. All of these things are in the PowerPoint. So again, you don't have to sweat, you know, being able to read this at top or anything like that. You have the references for it. And then it's really as simple as, you know, here's the copy function. So that way nothing gets missed. You know, sometimes when you try to highlight it yourself, you might miss the open bracket like I just did. Right. So just use the copy function, go to your web page, go to the right spot in the advanced SEO in Wix, paste it, save it, you're done. It's complete, right? You'll notice that there aren't a ton of categories here, like events types and performer types. They're limited, right? Like schema.org itself continues to evolve. So they started with events. Today you can get theater events, dance events, music events as subcategories of that. But when they started, and they're going to keep on evolving, one day they'll have a puppetry specific category, no doubt, because puppetry is a big deal. Right now they don't. You'd probably would pick theater. And so what is qualitatively different between a theater event and a music event? You might have, much more information about actors. You might have more information about, who the director is, playwrights, all of that stuff, right? While a music event is more about a band. And some of those, like, you wouldn't necessarily, unless it's classical, you wouldn't mention the composer, right? But in plays, we often will tell you who the playwright is. So that's where some of those nuances come in, where it's convenient that schema.org has evolved. Schema meaning what is all the markup and all the details for more specific things, basically. And over time, that's going to get deeper and deeper. So that's a good thing. I wanted to show you what the schema page looks like as a reference, because we've talked about it before. So I'm going to close this. Can close this. I can close this. Here we are. It had to be somewhere. So I'm now on schema.org itself. Okay. So this is a partnership of a bunch of search engines that have determined what to call things. Okay. Structured data only works because it's standardized. Right? So things are called what they are called. Don't just don't pluralize them. Don't add other characters to it. An event is an event. It's not event one or event summer or event, right? That's not the markup. So here is the raw information of all the items that they've determined could be included in terms of the properties, and it describes here what they are, of what a theater event is in this case. I'm on the theater side of it here. And event type is a theater performance. Great. It's not a book. It's not the play that I'm buying, right? It's the actual event. And you see all of this really cool stuff about what the thing is, the actors, so the people involved, whether there's ratings, maybe you're the top rated musical in the world or something like that, your ratings might show up. Is it for people or is it for organizations? So who's attending? All of this amazing stuff shows up here, and there's a lot of it, way more than the tool I just showed you accounted for. Okay, so the tool is like the stuff you must have. But if you wanted to build a really, really robust event engine that correlates a lot of the other information, that's not just about attending the event, but that's sort of building a library that is fully structured for all of the other pieces of information, who the actors are in it, who the director is. If you were to do that over time, what you would find is that Google gets ever smarter about relating those pieces of information when you do new stuff. Okay, so it's a lot more effort, because here in most of the scenarios that exist today, you have to do some of your own work on your own website to come to that level of markup. The WordPress plugins don't go down this rabbit hole nearly so deeply. Okay, so I wanted to just show that to you, because if somebody decides at some point that, I really get the structured data stuff, and I get the long-term power of being able to say, oh, I can now do a search, and all of a sudden, all the plays by that unknown playwright or niche playwright, not Shakespeare, not Moliere, right, start to show up and they become known. You start to be able to have these really powerful search results coming out of Google. Those knowledge panels that they construct. This is part of what you're starting to, in the long term, building for if you use more of these. Around who the plays are involved in. You could have you if you wanted to, you can include the people who work on those pieces that you're presenting, the carpenters, the set designers, the lighting designers, right? All of that stuff. You can totally integrate this. So you can see the power over time, not to sell tickets, but the power over time of wanting to go there in a more robust way. I think we'll see a lot more development around that coming up. What everybody has focused on primarily is the audience-facing side of it, not the broader uses that are possible. At the bottom of every single schema page for this stuff, you see the example down here. I hope you can see that. I'm going to make that maybe just a little bit larger. So this is what a page without markup might look like, right? Because everything is just HTML coded. There's nothing else going on. This is what an event in JSON LD looks like, right? This is an example to say, hey, here's an event. It's a theater event. Oh, look, it's Julius Caesar at Shakespeare's Globe Theater. Perfect. They always use really popular things, right? And this is what the JSON LD markup would look like. Script begins, script ends, and the stuff in between is all the good stuff. You see that it has same as references. This is important if you use your own website, but you also use Facebook events, or in this case, William Shakespeare, of course, has a Wikipedia entry. You can help Google disambiguate. You can make sure that Google understands, no, I mean that William Shakespeare, right? So the same as function that is embedded in these things is really cool, because it could be same as the Facebook event you've got. It could be same as, if it's about the person, playwright in this case, it could be same as Eileen Smith at Springworks, right? And your bio is there, right? So that's a really neat function to help disambiguate that's embedded in that. And then you can sort of get an appreciation of what that same content looks like as a structured view. So it's the JSON LD example that we just looked at, but this looks a little friendlier to actually potentially understand, right? Because it's just, you see, like it's very much like a spreadsheet, columns and rows. That's it, right? 2 columns and as many rows as you filled in. So on every single item that schema.org has schemas about, and there is an amazing number of them now. Where did I just get to? Like all of these creative works. So when you generate a new play, you might write a book. It's called a play, right? All of that stuff, or music recordings, recipes, TV series, all kinds of these creative works, they already have schema for. And what you can do is within your event schema, you might refer to the creative work, not just the event that you're putting on to render the thing as a live performance, but you might reference if there is a book, if there's a play that I can buy, right? For instance, you could reference that as well within that event schema, right? And then you can go down that rabbit hole if you really wanted to. So they can become quite long and quite comprehensive because you can combine things, right? It's just if each what I'm trying to say is each schema, like there's the properties from the event, but I think if I scroll down a little bit, I'll see properties from the thing. Right? So a schema doesn't just have to be one, it can only be about the live event or about the online event. You can actually have those other pieces of information layered on top of that about who that person, who the important people are that are involved. There might be some additional pieces, birth date, when they died, if by chance they're Shakespeare, and things of that nature, right? You could reference the book, easy. If there was a broadcast of a thing that you did, you could reference that, right? All within that event schema. So it just makes it more powerful. So far, so good.
I have a question, actually. It's a bit, well, I think it's related slightly. I had dabbled briefly in the Wikidata platform, yep, which is a bit more complicated than I thought when I first started. But now
there's a workshop coming up on the very thing for that very reason.
Yes. So maybe, and you'll definitely be talking about it, but is like Wikidata similar to Google Highlighter in
nope,
that?
Not at all.
Oh,
not at all. Totally different. So on the surface, it can feel really, really similar. Mm-hmm. But what it actually is and how it functions is not. Okay. We have a workshop on that on the 26th as part of the series, actually. Yeah. And I have a bunch of materials that we're actually creating right now on another project that is going to get into some granular detail of for performing arts specifically on what are the important things to do in Wikidata. Wikidata is in the category of a directory that is an open linked data directory. Okay. So it's not like a search engine at all. And people don't, you wouldn't use a regular web user would never ever go to Wikidata to do anything. It's ludicrous. It looks like crap, as you know. It's just a database view. It's really ugly. But many of the pieces of information that Google uses to populate its knowledge graphs, its knowledge panels, come from Wikidata. It's an open database. And it's just the facts. That's part of the reason why it looks terrible. It's not Wikipedia, where it's an encyclopedia article. It is just the facts about people, places, and things. Right? And the only things it cares about, it's not great for events. One-off events, do not use Wikidata. Way too labor intensive and you will not see the benefit. It's great for recurring events, festivals that happen in the third weekend in July every year. The Olympics, you know, things that recur are great. They're great for people. If you want to raise your profile as an artist, make sure you have a Wikidata listing. It works quite differently. And it's used, again, it all goes back to search engines. That's why we're interested in it, right? But it's a completely different method of getting information about your stuff into the online world. Okay. And we're going to deal with that next, like this week is this stuff. Next week is the Wikidata linked open directory, data population ball of wax.
I'm just anticipating.
Yeah, you're clearly you're a week ahead of me. So the last thing I want to do is I want to show you the WordPress plugins. And I want to show them to you in action, because that's way more fun than just talking about dry stuff. So one of the websites I manage has the 3 WordPress plugins operating that a colleague of mine, Joa out of Vancouver, he's done a bunch of work. He's a artist as well as a techie guy. He was part of the Kapakoa project, the Canadian Arts Presenting Association project around their linked digital futures. Linked digital futures was primarily concerned with Wikidata and things of that nature. So that's, you know, they've really championed that over the last 3 years. Anyway, Jai did a review of plugins on WordPress to figure out what combination of them will generate the best event listings and most reliable event listings. So he's come up with 3. The 3 are called Yoast, Y-O-A-S-T, Yoast for SEO, Schema Pro, and Modern Events Calendar. And what I'm going to show you next, and those are plugins, right? You know how to get a plugin on WordPress. You do a search in the plugin section of it. You say, hey, I'm looking for Schema Pro. It'll come up. You decide whether you want the free version or the paid version. Often the free versions are quite powerful. And sometimes, you know, if you have high enough use and you want a bit of extra function, you go for the paid version. It's great. What I want to show you is the back end of one of my sites. Happens to be the pitch.ca, actually. That has all 3 of them, because it's the most recent site that I've helped develop. The marketing side of that, not the not the showcasing pitch side. So this is laid out in a graphic interface. So I have to go to the Divi builder to actually see the content. It's there, but you don't see it in this view. Okay. What I want to show you is, here's Yoast for SEO. You can read this? So Yoast allows me to have my key phrase of what this content on this page is about. It gives me a preview. It's really nice. It gives me a preview of what the page will look like in a search result. It even has the image embedded here, right? Why does this stuff comes from my actual content, right? The title of a post is really important because that typically becomes the title, right, of a search result, which is the blue part of this. My meta description is right here, right? I type that in, and the longer I type, the less useful it becomes, because meta descriptions have a character limit, after which it just won't be used. And it gives me my analysis. So I just clicked on this thing. It gives me my analysis of how well my SEO is doing. Now, one of the things it tells me here is my key phrase distribution isn't great. A lot of my articles are really short on the pitch. So I don't meet their preferred word length for the article itself, which is 300 words. It's a bit skimpy. So that's why I get the problems. So I decide whether I want to write 50 more words or not. And I really don't have a need for 50 more words, so I'm not, right? Your event descriptions, sometimes, because they're coming from a brochure framework, sometimes they're really short. Online, they're often longer because you can say more. That's useful, right? More opportunity for keyword-rich content. The meta description length, it doesn't like it. It's because it's too long. So how do I fix that? I don't know. I'm just going to edit this a little. Take out the info session and the content and format of pitch videos. Learn to edit. Maybe we'll take out existing and starts to get heavy. Ah, look at that. My line just turned green. This is Yoast in action, right? So the important thing here is you don't have to know anything about SEO. All you have to do is fill in all the fields. That's it. You see how stupidly easy this is, right? So if you use a plugin like this, your task is not to understand everything that it does. Your task is to fill in every field. Keep it simple, right? Because we're not going to become, technical experts. We're content experts. And this is simply a tool that makes it really easy for a content expert to do the right thing, right? So keywords, description tags, we know that the title on the page is really important, right? So you see how your SEO title, I can adjust this down here. I can delete the page, for instance, and this should immediately almost, no, the page wasn't, it's the title that's sitting here. If I delete the title, right? So as opposed to, I don't have to type it in. I don't have to type in whatever the title is, but you can. So sometimes the title that shows up on a web page makes great sense for when a user reads that, but it's not really great for the SEO. So change it. You can do that, right? Or you can just keep the variable is called title. And here it's back now in my little preview. Okay. So it's super easy to use. And because it gives you this analysis, you can learn stuff if you want to. I get a lot of good jobs on this particular page. I often don't, by the way. A lot of my SEO is in the orange. I'm not a consumer-facing site. So I sometimes do the extra work to make it green, and often I really don't, because it's not worth it. My audience is okay with what I'm doing, right? They keep adding, this is a new thing that they've added recently, SEO performance. You can do some tracking on that. There's a little tool that they're now integrating with. It's kind of nice. I can add related keywords or not, right? So when you're using Yoast, one of the really neat features is it helps you become a better writer. So I'm still in Yoast here. I'm still just dealing with SEO, but one of the things they've done, because they can, is they're trying to help you out, figure out how to write your text to be more readable. This is for real users in the real world, not for the search engines. So they give you scores on stuff, and sentence length, passive voice, all kinds of parameters that they can, or when you don't use a lot of transition words between sentences. Every sentence starts with we do this, we do that, we think, as opposed to as a result of blah, blah, we are doing this, right? So just good writing, basically. And hey, that's actually pretty easy to automate. So they are. So you can choose to use that feature. It has an integration with social. So I can select the image for my Facebook and for my Twitter posts. Those are the two that it integrates with right now. So I can actually have, as opposed to just using the meta description I wrote, I can customize that for Twitter and Facebook. Sometimes I have more characters, sometimes I have fewer characters. What happens with this is once I put that into, imagine I have this page, I take the URL and put it into Facebook. What is it going to pick up? If I use this, the chances are it'll pick up this. If I don't use that, it'll just pick up whatever the website said. Okay. That's probably pretty good too. But all to say, you have that opportunity for a bit of customization here, which is nice. Sometimes that's more important than others. For some of your events, you might find it's hugely important. And all I do here is I can say Facebook specific description. You see how that changed up here in my preview, right? My little gobbledygook stuff just keeps on going. So again, these tools have become really, really good. When I delete it, it goes back to the default, which is the meta description that I had earlier. So you can see that Yoast is pretty powerful, pretty nice to use. I didn't have to take a lesson in it. I just installed it and poked around. And it's like the view is below your page or below your post, right? So you may not use a visual builder like that. You would have all your text sitting on top here, right? You'd be able to see that. So what happens for me in this view, I have to go to Divi to edit anything if I decide my sentence length is too long. I agree on readability, I want to fix it. I just have a second window open. If it's like in a single view for you, then you just scroll up and you fix it and you scroll back down and it'll automatically have updated. It's pretty neat. You see Schema Pro down here? So that's the other plugin. Here's the title for it. Anyway, we see where we are, right? So Schema Pro is the other plugin, and you see that there's more options here. And it's, again, all it is you're entering the information that, either it picks it up automatically or I entered it, right? There is the level of the application itself. So we see some information here at the top level. This happens to be an article, a news article. So I can, I can make sure that it knows what kind of an article it is. Something like that, maybe. There's a default for this, I guess. Most of the time it's just a blog post for me, right? And you got a little, there we are, we got a little tool there. Here we are. So there's I clicked the X, which deleted it, as opposed to the down arrow where you get the other categories here. So most of my stuff's just a blog post, so I keep that. If you have something else, a report or whatever, you'll find that things, change accordingly. The options you get are always contextual. Author name, that's great. We have the headline. Here's what I wanted to say. So I entered some of that stuff. And so that all becomes schema markup. So again, like when you're using this plugin, you're not doing anything actually technical or coding related. You're just filling in the fields that the plugin gives you. So far, so good, Amy? Then the third one I want to show you is, so I'm on the same site. This is still the pitch. We have an events calendar installed. I don't have any events on the site live. It might be, I don't know, if you did demo sessions or something like that, or conferences we attend. Those are the kind of things you might list, right? But it's empty right now, so I don't have a thing to show you other than what it's like to add a new event. So this is the plugin for Modern Events Calendar. It's just another plugin, and you see how it shows up in the sidebar. It's got a bunch of functionalities there. Again, the task is to simply fill in all the information you've got. So I've got a title, I've got body text, whatever stuff that you want to describe there. And now I use the event details. So in your HTML world, you would just put everything into this description field, right? It just becomes, date, time, place, artist, you would just put all of this stuff in here. There's no markup when you do that. There's no structured data when you do that. So when you use the utility, event details comes with Modern Events Calendar. So here's my date. Fill in the date. Here's my start time. Maybe it's 8 p.m. Great. This is all you have to do. It ends at the same day. It's a 2-hour show. It ends at 10 p.m. Right? Notes on time, whatever you need to say. It usually knows what time zone your website is in. So that's always helpful, right? There's countdown methods. Some of these websites counting down to their festival start. So there's some integration of stuff like that here. Then we've other things, event repeating. Is it every Tuesday you're doing that workshop? Location, venue. So if you want to, insert a new location, you get the name, the event location, latitude, longitude. This is the best way to disambiguate, is just tell me where you are. Where do you get the longitude for your location, for your venues? Where do you go to do that?
Google?
Yeah, exactly. Google Maps will tell you. On any point on any Google map, you can just, right click and it'll give you the longitude and latitude super specifically. Location, website, right? Any links that are relevant, your event link, where's the stuff listed on your website? Organizer, insert in your organizer, people, places, emails, right? So this is all part of the plugin for modern events. If you fill all of this stuff in, does it cost anything? Right? Schema, and then there's back to, is it scheduled, postponed, canceled, or did it move online? It's integrated right in here. So when you plan your March events and you want to have everything, scheduled for in person, be aware that if you use the tool like that, it is as simple as this in the event listing, in the calendar itself, and now give me the link for your Zoom thing or whatever it is that you're using. So the headache should reduce a lot, right? Around how do I do that? How do I let the world know? How do I let Google know? You change it here, you update the listing, it's done. It'll get picked up in fairly quick order by search engines that are crawling your site regularly. So these are the 3 plugins that my colleague, dear colleague Jay, researched as the 3 best right now, as of a year ago, when he did that work. And like I say, all of these things keep evolving, right? So what I installed today is, in 6 months from now, it's going to be better. It's not going to be worse. It's going to have more power, more function, more integration, with making it easier and faster to accomplish these things. This is a million miles from what it would have been like back in 2017, but this was kind of an obscure thing to most people. It existed, but not widely known. And now these tools, therefore the tools are quite new, and they keep on developing, they keep on evolving as a result of that. Questions, comments?
I'm glad to see that our instincts on our end have been sort of in the right direction. Yoast we've been using.
Great.
And we had actually installed the Modern Events Calendar plugin. Like we were kind of last minute in doing this for our event that we had in the winter. So we were trying to throw everything up on the website as fast as we could and get everything done. And I was actually filling out the information for the events, I believe in this exact format. But then it was making me, I didn't really understand where it was going. So I was feeling like there was going to be the information posted on our website twice, rather than now clearly understanding that it's not necessarily going to be posted somewhere on our website, but it's rather like some of this might be with the plugin. I don't know exactly how it works, but rather the tagging that needed to happen, that wouldn't have been visible, like front facing. It would be for a search engine or a machine to see.
So you need to, when you use a plugin like this, when you use the event calendar, you need to generate a page where your events live.
Yeah.
Right. So if you already have a page where you've done the HTML of your events, be aware that that's going to be a conflict.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of doing the HTML for your events, put all of your events here into this engine, but you need to then have a page where they are published.
Right.
Okay, so you see here, oops, event ABC. The permalink for that should now be event ABC. There's an actual page that gets generated.
Yeah.
When I hit publish, right? That page you have to link on your website.
Right.
Right.
And then
so it might be a menu item sometimes. So
Yeah.
sometimes it says you got a calendar and you call it a calendar. And the way that that calendar is populated is by using Modern Events Calendar. And you have different views of that you can determine, right? But you actually have to create a page where it lives so the user can see it.
Yeah. So we had created a page separately, and then we're trying to use this to generate a calendar. Like, anyway, it was all happening in the at the same time, and we needed to publish it. So we had, since we had the page already made, we kind of backed away from at this instance because we realized that it was maybe duplicating or, you know, not doing the right thing. So in that case, since the page was already there with the information, likely some of that the add-on for Chrome, like you have, or something like that, to sort of take what's already there and enter the information, or the other creator that the template creator that you were using to, we have it already on the front facing part, so we just have to add the back facing part, whereas this Modern Events Calendar does both.
Yep, exactly. You do it once.
Yeah.
Right. So it's you just have to make sure that you actually, you know, have that you publish it.
Yeah.
And that you, so there's two steps. There's publishing something like an event that you would have created. After you publish it, you can now create a menu item or a drop-down menu item or something like that, right? And you can link that so that it's visible to users.
Yep.
So what you want to do is you want to transition, if you already have the plugin, transition to actually using it, but you just have to make that little connection happen.
Yep.
Right. I use it. This site's a little older, and you know that research wasn't available back in the day in quite that way. This was built like probably in 2019 or something like that. So I use a different event listing engine on the Digital Arts Nation website, and I'm trying to load this. It's going to take a little while. It's really slow. That site drives me crazy. This is a different visual interface, right? This is our workshops that we're doing. This is what the event data looks like in this one, right? So all I need to do on the live site, so if we go to Digital Arts Nation, there is a little widget that we have on the home page where all of upcoming workshops are assigned to show up on the home page, right? But I also have upcoming events as a menu item. And if I click on upcoming events as a menu item, I see a slightly different rendition of the exact same information. And I can click on any of this, and I now see the detailed information that gets generated out of the database, right? So by filling in the fields I can, it's like, is it an online event? Yes, no, it's the first question. What kind of online? I create some categories for that. If it was physical, it's all about the venue and address and all that stuff, right? So again, filling in this information here, I just make sure that I don't have an HTML page for these events.
Yeah.
I just use the thing, and then all I need to make sure of is that I can navigate to it as a user for your website, and it'll take a step out, like for anything new moving forward, just use a frame that is your long-term solution.
Yeah.
If you can, and if the ad hoc stuff like the pieces that we talked about earlier, where you can place the code into your page, just make sure you place it in the header of the actual HTML. That's you got to need to know that, because in WordPress WordPress refers to plugins, right?
Yep.
So it doesn't tell you where it puts stuff in the same way that Wix does, which doesn't use these kind of plugins. Right? So just you got to put it in the header, in the HTML view of the page.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, that's what makes me more weary. It's just one day I would like to learn coding more, but now since I don't really have to yet, I'm definitely going to be leaning into the tools that do it for me instead of having to worry about
good on you to want to learn coding, but I suggest that's a career change.
Yeah.
All of this stuff that I'm talking about here is not a career change. Right? That stuff that is really content owners without any technical knowledge can actually accomplish this simply by using the plugins they've installed. So the technical knowledge is, I got to have a WordPress website. As you know, they're pretty easy to create. And I often get help with creating the ones I do because I'm limited in my time and I really don't want to, poke around nearly as much. So I tell somebody what I want, they build it for me. Usually it costs me a few $100. It's like nothing is complicated, right? And then I go from there. On the pitch, we worked with a guy, I think it was like $1,200. We told him what plugins we wanted. We told him all the stuff we wanted. We gave him some content to start with so that he could, implement enough so that I can then maintain that without a lot of headaches. For me to write all the content to send to somebody who then implements it, who I then have to check. Like that workflow doesn't really work so well when I have a do-it-yourself kind of a frame, right? So I make a bunch of choices about that in terms of where I might use somebody to set it up. I've never ever had gotten help with setting up a plugin. Like it's so easy. You just get it and you activate it and it's there.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a really nice integration in terms of WordPress. What Wix has done isn't really a workaround. Wix just has a different method. And it's very fast. It's very easy. You can do all the things you need to do there. It's just a slightly different workflow because you got to generate the JSON LD literally and then copy and paste it into a specific spot. That's, does it take more time? Probably not even, right? It's just, okay, maybe a tiny bit more time, but counted in minutes. So unless you did 1,000 events, it doesn't really matter, right? If you did 1,000 events, you might want to have a different solution that's more automated, where you would do a custom build for events in Wix. And you can generate your own code to do that, right? You would say, okay, fine, I'm going to bite the bullet and do that. But if you're just doing a few events in a year, it's quite reasonable. Any other comments or questions on this?
The timing couldn't be better as we're figuring out our programming for March. So I'm very excited that we can hopefully implement this reasonably for those as we finalize and schedule those events. So
absolutely
very excited about that.
And you can, and I mean, there's always, whenever you do something new, there's always a problem. You'll always run up against something. You kind of go like, I don't really get this, or it's behaving strangely. So you want to have a couple of hours to kind of go like, what's up with that, right? If it takes a heck of a lot more than that, there's a bigger issue at play, and that really shouldn't happen. One of the things I want to show you, Eileen, I said earlier, there's lots of JSON LD markup generators in the PowerPoint. There's a few links to some of these, including the schema dev that I showed you at the very beginning, the technical SEO one that I had included in the homework. I'm not biased towards any of them. I just like to use free stuff. So there's a few options there, and because you can immediately test it, there's a validator at schema.org itself. If you want to copy and paste something, you can totally do that. And then Google has a couple of tools that you can use during development, so before you're finished, and the other one you can use afterwards to see what the status of your what they call rich results is. So it's a different universe than what we were used to, but it's become a lot easier to use for like run-of-the-mill normal people like myself and yourselves. I'm not a techie, despite the way I speak. I'm absolutely not a techie. I don't do coding. I don't do any of that stuff. I'm interested in the interface of the marketing side of it to make sure that we build stuff in a way where search engines can find it, because that's the primary avenue that your end users will find you, right? So that's really the motivation around that. The last thing I want to show you is I did write a pretty substantive piece that's published on Digital Arts Nation. And it's based on client work I've done with other folks. And I'm just integrating, getting I'm trying to get more concise about how to say the stuff, make sense of it, people to refer to things. So on Digital Arts Nation, as part of the digital playbook that we created, there is a piece around mastering discoverability for the performing arts. And what we've talked about today is one part of that. What we'll talk about on the 26th around Wikidata is another part of that same playbook. So there is a sort of a 20-page reference document as well that tries to, help us make sense of that. And so it's not about remembering everything we've talked about today at all, right? But it gives you some places where you can go and refresh what was this all about and what are we talking about and how do I do that, right? So it's trying to get to that practice level and really focusing on how. Here's the upcoming workshops. So on the 19th, on Wednesday, we're repeating what we did today. The 26th, we're going to focus on Wikidata. And then we have a couple of, like a Wednesday, Saturday for practice review. Whatever stuff you run up against that gets in the way, we can try to figure that out together during a couple of sessions then.
Yay, that sounds great. At the beginning when we were talking about the the different categories and stuff, it was just making me think, and since the performing arts have been sort of slower to catch on to this, I think as more companies, individual artists and groups, events start to implement this, it will only increase the detail and the capacity to actually have more categories like puppetry when there's more demand for it as well, because there's no need for it until people start wanting to add that detail in.
That's exactly correct.
Here's hoping that we can start to create that momentum slowly but surely into the community to make people, or to help people to implement these tools for them to be discovered and to add more nuance and humanity and perspective into all of these different categories as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's been a lot of work that Kapakoa and their partners have done around performing arts on Wikidata, for instance. They actually just recently won an award from Wikidata for their work that they've done to really elevate, what's available on Wikidata for performing arts. So there is opportunity to be very active participants on the backbone side of that. There's a group out in Toronto that Stage Page. Muriel Marshall, who's also a theater artist, performing artist. She's become a tech developer, and she actually has a W3C. So W3C is like the regulator of the internet. She has a W3C initiative dealing with performing arts. So there's some really, great work Canada is generating in that arena to actually influence how visible the sector can be in these tools. So that's, absolutely. And there's no reason for puppetry not to figure at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yay. Any other questions or comments, Eileen, or anything else?
Oh, I just, it's wonderful, but at the same time, capacity. So it's just human beings to do your things. And so it's good to see the efficiencies. And it also, that it isn't, I think it's depending on whether you've been in the back end of your website and whether you have someone else do it. And because I have been, and I was even in the early days having to do HTML, learn by yourself how to do the thing because it's the only way you could do it. It's slightly less intimidating, and stuff, but but then it just becomes your clarity and your time management and your, Fortunately, our Puppet Festival is in August, so we're hoping for things like that. And then our new short works programming, again, how to run a digital festival. And that's going up at the end of February. So we'll be, because our other arm is Newark. And so getting that intersection and how to deal with those things, and also learning where do you sustain information on platforms. So when you build all of this stuff that you're building right now, be those Digital Nation things, are they living on they're living on a free website somewhere, or you have to pay, and then
Digital Arts Nation is definitely a paid thing. Like we're paying, you know, we're paying an internet service provider to host it. We're not paying for the template per se. Like it's a, you know, it's a free WordPress template. But I am paying for some of the plugins, like $99 a year for Schema Pro or something like that. So it's pretty incremental costs usually.
And for us looking at the situation of videos like this, where you keep things living, and obviously there's a shelf life to some of this material, but other material, it is really our goal for this particular information is accessibility over time, and that people can come and work in their own good time to go over this particular workshop 17 times if they need to, because they do. And so where do we house that so that it is both accessible in the sense that we can afford to put it somewhere, but also that it, you know, this is geared to help people at whatever tier of size of company that this is, and it will help people that are individual artists of any art form, individual artists, small company theater presenters, small festivals that are, you know, so from the marketing side of that, you know, and the value of this content, and which is again a Google schema searchable piece, they all interconnect, and the networking part about getting these performing aspects linked to each other so they can help each other is it's all entwined.
It very much is, and it's, you know, and it's a slightly different way of working than what you've been used to. Right. So that transition is something that you really have to actually think about, because it does change the roles, it does change tasks that somebody has to do. Right. And we're really optimized for a certain way of being in the world. You got really good at that. And this is a slightly different, you know, mindset in a way. And the kind of questions you're asking, it's like those are pretty advanced questions, in fact. Like to realize that one should think about where one's videos live, and that has impact on accessibility, longevity, you know, usership. That's a pretty advanced thought that a lot of people wouldn't have had in the performing arts 3 years ago or 2 years ago, right? And so it's good. It's good. And there's answers, and the answers depend on your context, right?
Indeed.
So that's the next piece, is to sort of figure out that, how do I make some of those decisions and make them sustainable for myself?
Indeed. And the, so, and that's because I went to your Digital Nations conference, which means that you're interfacing with, but this information applies, and so on we dance. Like
many topics, learning some more means also learning a lot more questions that you need to answer as well.
That is a problem, isn't it?
But that's the fun part about learning. It never ends.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. It's good to see you both.
Good to see you. Thank you so much to Canada Council for their support of these workshops, and we'll see you next time.